see that some people, while we know some people have to leave, don't forget if someone else could put that the survey link into the chat. We do want to get your feedback about this training and meeting. So thank you for that. The next thing is walk through the bylaws, which I am presenting, and I can do that pretty quickly and hopefully catch us back up on time. And I actually love presenting on the bylaws. Michelle's going to present those slides for me. I was the district parliamentarian for 2.5 years before this role, and I've done it at the unit level as well. I actually serve as the parliamentarian at Marina too. So I love bylaws. Next slide, please. So why does every board member need to know about the bylaws? It's the basic framework for the bylaws. The poor bylaws get a bad rap. You see people think of them as a bunch of rules that are just boring and restrictive and, oh, here's some great bedtime reading, but really it does provide, it's the GPS for your unit. It has most, if not all, the answers to your questions. And if it doesn't, we know where to go now, thanks to the last presentation to capta.org. The bylaws are a legally binding document that governs the PTA. Every board member should know and understand the content, and it is reviewed annually. So you get together a bylaws committee and look through your bylaws annually, but you need not update them, but for every 5 years. That used to be every 3 years. It's actually every 5 years, but we will talk more about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So there is the bylaws, but those last 2 pages of the bylaws are actually referred to as the standing rules. And what's the difference between the 2 of them? The bylaws are the framework, it's the governing structure, it has all of the big picture things, the things that are mostly consistent between all of our units. So it has the purpose, the policies, and the principles, whereas the standing rules have the things that are specific to your PTA. And the standing rules are actually more flexible, and that makes sense because it's about you and how you run your organization. So in the meat and the body of the bylaws, it will list like which are your officers. Do you have a president? Everyone has a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. But do you have an executive vice president? It will say that or not. You actually don't have to have an historian. Does you have an historian? That part will be in the bylaws. The parts that are in the standing rules, as I said, that are more specific to your unit, that's going to be like, when do you meet? So do you meet every 3rd Wednesday, for example? And the standing rules are more flexible. So the standing rules can actually be amended at every single association meeting if you needed to. But don't ever hear that happening. But they're very flexible. Maybe you need to change that date of your meeting. The bylaws are the part that takes a little bit longer, a couple weeks, and has to go through channels, they call it, which means from your unit to our district to California PTA, there's an approval process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So what is on your cover page? If you all remember, don't just leave the bylaws to the parliamentarian. Every board member should have at least one read through it and should be referring to it when you do have questions. So that front page of your bylaws has very basic things like what your national PTA and California PTA IDs are, has your actual legal name. Again, we are out of council because we go directly from the district to the unit. Some other districts have multiple councils within them. It would have your address, the grades that are in your group, and the organization date is that date you were founded. Next slide, please. So if you look through your bylaws, I just put this slide up so that you can see there are many, sections through it. Since we're kind of picking up on time here, I'm just going to point out some things I think are more important to note. For example, the name is the official legal name. So you're not actually, I just know Sherman Elementary has a PTA and it's Sherman PTA. It's actually not Sherman Elementary PTA. So when you open a bank account, for example, you want to be using the exact name that's on your legal document of your bylaws. So you can check on that. The dues are part of your bylaws, and that will explain which portion stays with your unit, which portion you transfer on to the state and the district. If you're using Totem, the online membership system, it's great. It does that all for you. So we highly encourage you to join and use Totem. In Article 5 about the officers and elections, I just want to call out so that everyone understands that your principal is a board member at your PTA automatically, as is one teacher representative. So that's not something you vote on. The principal and your teacher representative are automatically board members. And that Article 5 will also have information about the nominating committee. You'll notice that most are either 3 or 5 people in your nominating committee. That's the committee that helps you to decide who will be your leaders the following year. It's 3 or 5 so that in case there's a vote, you don't have to, it's not an even vote, 2 to 2. So we recommend that. And a lot of the other stuff is pretty standard between the bylaws. So I'm just going to keep moving on here to catch us up with time. So next slide, please. One thing I would suggest that someone on your board could do is just to create sort of a tour guide or summary of the bylaws, because any member that asks for the bylaws, you can provide the bylaws to them. That's actually how I got involved with PTA, really, is I had been involved with a different board and knew that bylaws existed, and I knew that that was the great place to find out what this organization is really about. And so I walked in as a kindergarten mom and said, can I see your bylaws? And I think they knew then that I was a good person to ask to help volunteer. So that's kind of how I got involved a long time ago. But if you create a summary like this, we can put a link into the chat that there is an example of a bylaws summary, or we'll include that with you after, along with the recordings of these. But if you just kind of lay out just a summary of key points for people, that can be really helpful. And you can introduce that at the beginning of your school year so people understand that bylaws exist and what they are. So next slide, please. And this is our last.
Melissa, there was a question in the chat about the teacher representative.
Yes. Can you read the question?
Can the teacher representative also be an officer, or should it be a separate teacher?
No, so that's its own voting role. People that are on the board, of course, need to be an official PTA member. And so a teacher can be a different officer role, but separately, a teacher can just be a teacher representative. Does that answer the question?
There's one small caveat for teachers or SFUSD employees. They cannot be treasurer.
They can't be a check signer.
Oh, check signer, yeah, check signer.
They can.
Oh, go ahead.
Suze, we're going to say the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the question was more, can the teacher rep also be an officer? Like they can fill both those roles, or do you need to have 2 separate people?
No, so no one can fill 2 roles at once. And that's because only one person can have 1 vote. So the teacher representative would have 1 vote, and the other role would have its own vote. But the same thing, one person can't be both president and secretary, for example.
Okay, I think that answers the question they had.
Thank you.
But they can speak up if it didn't.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is the last slide. Just want to let you know that the district PTA is here to support you in understanding the bylaws and that bylaws update process, to offer parliamentary procedure training or to consult on elections. So we can even come to your elections if you need help, or a parliamentarian can work with you on updating those bylaws. The best thing to do that we recommend is to use the e-bylaws. It's a very organized system. You'll go to that website and apply for a login to access these e-bylaws. Something to note about that is it's not a storage system for your bylaws. We can't go to e-bylaws and look at everyone's official bylaws. It's more of a system to help you create the bylaws. That first step, as I mentioned, is to just get together a review committee. They will look to see if there's any updates. You might have no changes to your bylaws and simply be updating to the latest version. And that's okay. Whatever your decision is about how you're updating those bylaws to the most recent version, you will then submit them to your board first for approval. Once the board approves those changes or an update, you will then send them off to the district parliamentarian, to us, and we will get that approval from California PTA. When those bylaws are approved by the California parliamentarian, we will return those to you, and then they are adopted by your membership. So it's decide what you're updating, get the approval from your board, get the approval from California PTA, and then it goes to your membership. It's not until the membership votes to adopt those bylaws that the decisions or the changes are in effect. So if you're changing the dues, for example, you can't start collecting that new updated dues amount until after they've been adopted. And if you have more questions about this, please just send them to parliamentarian@sfpta.org, or we can try to see if we have some time a little bit later during the break. I can stay and answer questions, or join me at the breakout session at the end. Wanted to also, we've said it a couple of times, but my reminder up there on the slide is if you are interested, that district PTA role is open for parliamentarian. Let's see, how are we on time? Should we get on to the next step to the president's training? And also,
Sure.
I do want to encourage you, please, stand up. I did turn off your video, whatever you're comfortable with, but it's good to like always stand up and stretch too. So,
Can I make a quick announcement as we